Good morning. The Prime Minister is on his way to Egypt to talk about the climate, but problems are piling up back home. Welcome. It's going to be a busy one. He is not going. He was a no-show, but now is. Leaders and experts heading to Egypt to look for ways to cool the climate. Well, another familiar face.
There's a huge amount of talent on the backbenches. I'm not talking about me.
Heads off to a different kind of gathering altogether.
I also understand the deep disappointment.
Last year there was emotion and political energy at the climate summit. But the economic picture's darkening, with less cash for everything to go around.
The level of economic activity is likely to be flat and even fall for some time.
This morning, we have two big connected questions. Can we afford to solve the climate crisis, or can we afford not to act? Joining me this morning is Labour's Shadow Climate Change Secretary, Ed Miliband, and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, essentially the Prime Minister's right-hand man, Oliver Dowden. The leader of the Lib Dems, Sir Ed Davey, is here, and so is Baroness Campbell, who many see as the architect of the spectacular success of the Lionesses this summer. And a call to all Trekkies. I know you're out there, and William Shatner fans. He will be taking us on his own real-life journey to space.
The only mystery was how palpably black it was. And in that moment, I thought I saw death.
You don't want to miss that. Joining me throughout the programme at the desk is Diana Johnson, the Labour Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, which keeps tabs on how the government handles immigration. Miles Allen, Professor of Geosystem Science at Oxford University, and the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Justine Greening. A very warm welcome to you. Now, it is one of the issues of our time, and world leaders, including the will he, won't he Prime Minister, are heading to Egypt for the climate summit right now. So let's crack on with that climate conversation. Miles Allen is one of the country's foremost climate experts, and you invented the concept of net zero. We've seen this year floods in Pakistan, severe drought in Somalia. How quickly do you think climate change is accelerating?
Well, we're already at 1.2 degrees of warming, and more than half the warming that we've experienced to date has happened since the 1980s. So that's the speed of change we're seeing right now. And of course, that means that if we're going to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, we've got very, very little time to act.
And just remind us that 1.5 level, if it goes above that, that's the...
Well, every tenth of a degree of warming increases the risk of these extreme weather events that people are experiencing and the risks of further impacts of climate change. So it's not that the planet falls over a cliff at 1.5 degrees, it just gets progressively worse. And one thing which is very clear is that by the time we get to 2 degrees and beyond, then big systems of our planets, like, for example, tropical coral reefs, will be gone.
Start to fail. Well, it's interesting, the COP summit doesn't make it to any of the front pages this morning. We can take a look, lots of different stories there. The Telegraph talking about the Chancellor plotting a tax grab, the Sunday Express having the bank holiday for the coronation, the Observer mentioning a potential nurses' strike. Diana Johnson, it's interesting too that none of the front pages have the immigration story, but what's your view on what we've seen in the last week?
Well, the immigration story is running, and the Home Affairs Select Committee, when it had the Chief Inspector for Borders and Immigration in front of us, that's when the spotlight really came onto Manston and what was happening there, the backlogs, the 4,000 people who are supposed to be a maximum of 1,600 in there, and that has been running now for several days. We still are not quite clear how the Home Office has got itself into the position where they've got that large number of people at Manston. And we've also heard about the cost of hotels, 5.6 million a day that's being spent on hotels. And we're still not really clear what the Home Secretary in her first tenure as Home Secretary, what she did at that stage when it was developing.
We'll be putting some of that to Oliver Dowden, but just briefly, Justine Greening, I must also show our viewers a story that they might have missed this morning. The Sunday Times has a series of expletive-laden texts from the Government Minister, Gavin Williamson, to the then Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. Now, on a family show, I don't want to repeat some of the language language in there, but they're pretty unpleasant. What do you think when you see that, Justine? I mean, this was meant to be the sort of end of Tory turmoil, everything moving on to be boring and sensible again.
I just think this is the third time under the third Prime Minister that Gavin Williamson has been generating bad headlines, one way or another. The texts he sent to the Chief Whip were unacceptable. And I think Rishi Sunak doesn't have the bandwidth for this kind of negative publicity when he's building up towards a really important event on the 17th of November, the budget. So it's unacceptable, but it's also hugely unwelcome for the government to have this as a distraction.
OK, we'll talk to Oliver Dowden about that shortly too. Now, this time last year, world leaders descended onto Glasgow for the COP climate summit then and made a series of promises that meant keeping global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees, as we've just been talking about, was just about still possible. But the vows made since then look a bit shaky, and if anything, the situation might have got worse. Labour's Shadow Climate Change Secretary Ed Miliband is here, and you'll be going to the climate summit in Egypt a bit later this week, but it's great to have you here this morning. The aim of last year's COP in Glasgow, with the UK as president, was to keep warming to 1.5 degrees. But has the chance to do that slipped out of our reach?
Well, we're way off where we need to be. You know, the UN issued a report last week saying that we're heading for 2.8 degrees of global warming, and that's partly because, as you say, Laura, that the promises made in Glasgow were not kept. And at the same time, your viewers will be thinking we're in the middle of an energy crisis. Now, the message I'll be taking to COP, and Labour will be taking if we were in government, is it is now cheaper to save the planet than to destroy it, a reason for optimism. And that's because renewable power, solar, wind and other forms of zero carbon energy are so much cheaper than fossil fuels. So it is a dire situation, but there is reason for hope. And what we need is British leadership to put forward that agenda. We're putting it forward at home, we'd be taking it to COP as well.
But when it comes to COP itself, some campaigners, like Greta Thunberg, I know you've met her, look at it and think, you know what, this is a talking shop. It's thousands of people getting together, packed into a conference centre. If we look at how last year's promises haven't been kept, I mean, what's the point of these big summits? And what's the point, forgive me, of you going along there too as an opposition politician?
It's an imperfect process, but it's the best process we've got. You see, look, the point about the climate crisis is it is a global problem. We can't solve it on our own. Now, the real regret I have is that Rishi Sunak has sent out a message with his dithering about whether he was going to go and some of his policy agenda that Britain is out of the climate leadership business. Britain needs to be in the climate leadership business, Laura, for climate, but also for energy bills, for energy security, for jobs. This is the opportunity of the future. And that's the message that I'll be taking to COP and we should be taking as a country.
But has the UK's presidency of COP been a failure, do you think? I mean, if we look at the hard evidence, last year there were nearly 200 countries who promised that they would come back with more ambitious goals.
And they
only 24 of them have.
Yeah.
But do you think then the UK's presidency has been a
I don't
failure?
think it has achieved what it should have done. Look, I think Alok Sharma, the COP president, did a sort of creditable job in trying, but it hasn't shown. There's a vacuum of leadership here, and there is a chance. You know, there is a chance for Britain to lead. See, we have a commitment to get to zero carbon power by 2030 in Britain. That's Labour's commitment. That will be a world.
On COP, though, why should our viewers have any faith in this process at all? What difference does it make that politicians like you are getting on a plane to go and talk to each other and to talk to experts when last year's results didn't?
Because we've got to work with others to move forward, because we've got to lead, and because there is an opportunity, despite what, you know, you can look at it as glass half full or glass half empty, but despite all of the problems and all of the challenges, countries are moving. Now, they're not moving nearly fast enough, but the point of leadership, the point of building alliances, which is what we would be doing, is to get others to come with you. And we can do that, but we've got to do the right thing at home. You can't. I've been at these summits, Laura, and if you go, as Britain is going to be doing, and saying, Rishi Sunak, we want to lead, and then people say, but you've got an onshore wind ban, that's against clean power. You're going hell for leather for new fossil fuel licences. Well, that's inconsistent. You're reneging on your commitments that you made in Glasgow in terms of helping poorer countries. That's not leadership. And you weren't even thinking you were going to go.
Well, we'll be putting some of that to Oliver Dowden later, but in terms of you going, one of the issues around this whole meeting is Egypt's human rights record. Now, under President Sisi, he has cracked down on civil society, and there is specifically a British human rights activist, Alaa Abdel Fattah, who's been in jail for 9 years. He's on hunger strike. We understand he's going on a water strike. There he is there.
Deeply serious issue.
Do you have any sense of shame in going to COP in Egypt? Because some politicians from some countries have chosen not to go on principle
I will be raising this issue. I'm going to talk to the family before I go. This is a very, very serious situation.
But who will you raise it with?
Well, I'm going to make sure that I raise it with the Egyptians while I'm there. Because look, this is a serious situation. This is somebody who is in jail, who has been on this hunger strike. He was jailed because of social media posts, I think. He was jailed for the most sort of wrong-headed reasons. And absolutely we should go. But we can't abdicate from leadership. We can't, we have to go. I'm going to go and raise these issues, but we can't abdicate our leadership role.
But some activists are saying that you should not go because of this.
I think it's
you should not be giving Egypt credibility by attending this event.
I don't want in any way to underestimate the importance of this issue, the issue that you've raised. But the right thing to do is to go and raise it, and then engage on these really important issues of climate, which is an existential issue facing the world.
There certainly is opportunity when it comes to climate change, but people are also often asked to make sacrifice.
Sure.
Now, why should people in this country think, you know what, yeah, I'm going to change my lifestyle, I'm going to do things differently? When you look at the statistics, and China, India, these huge emitters, what's coming out of those countries dwarfs anything that people in this country could be expected to do to change their behaviour.
Because my offer and my appeal to people is that we should go green for better lives, not worse lives. You see, if I'd been on this programme 10 years ago, I'd have been saying to you, this is the ethical choice. Maybe it's not the economic choice, but it's the ethical choice. That's what's changed. Solar and wind power in Britain are 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels. So saying no to that renewable revolution that we need isn't good for bills, it drives up energy bills. Our world-leading commitment to get to 2030 zero carbon power will actually cut bills by £93 billion.
Well,
it's a source of...
People may quibble with
our plan for GB Energy, a publicly owned energy generation company, will create jobs across our country. This is about jobs and wealth and opportunity.
Except when it comes to GB Energy, which is Labour's plan to have a publicly owned energy company.
Yeah.
We've been talking to people in the private sector about this and energy experts, and they say, what's the point of doing that? The private sector has the expertise, they have the technology, they're looking for government to lead. They're not looking for government to set it up on their own. Why do that?
Well,
and why is that a good use of public money?
Well, let me explain.
Right now, when budgets are squeezed, budgets are tight.
Understood. Let me explain. So 45% of our offshore wind assets are owned by foreign governments. Not foreign companies, but foreign governments. Because all around the world, you've got these countries that are recognising that if you have a domestic national champion in energy, it can create the jobs in the supply chain for you, it can guarantee energy security for you, and it can also ensure that you meet your commitments. Now, we're going to be working with the private sector. This isn't to replace the private sector. This is to partner with the private sector.
Then it duplicates and it
no,
costs
it doesn't
extra
duplicate.
billions of pounds.
Absolutely not. It complements the private sector. It doesn't duplicate it, it complements it because it will drive private investment. You see, some people think, well, if the public sector plays its role, then somehow it will stop the private sector investing. It won't. It will actually lever in private investment. So if you think, to take this week, we've seen, for example, an electric battery manufacturer in Britain, that's a British Volt, in trouble, right? Now, why is that? I've talked to the people involved. They say, well, in other countries, we get support. We get partnership from government, but our government abdicates responsibility.
But that doesn't necessarily mean there has to be a publicly owned company. I mean, actually, Rolls-Royce, for example, has got technology that they want to develop and is ready to go. They don't want the government to set up its own company. They want clarity from government, certainly, but you don't have to set up you don't have to spend taxpayers' money setting up your own company to do so.
I don't agree with that, because all of the lessons from around the world are that if you want to build the supply chains, if you want to ensure you can move at the speed you need, if you want to invest in newer technologies, which the private sector is worried about in terms of risk, like floating wind and green hydrogen and others, then you need that partnership approach.
Okay.
And just be clear, this is a partnership approach.
OK, I know we're going to be talking that a lot, probably all the way up until the next general election. But this week, just to go back to COP, part of the debate is going to be about the richer part of the world paying the poorer part of the world to help them deal with carbon costs. And some people even call it reparations. Essentially, wealthy countries ought to be giving money to countries that are finding the impact of climate change very profound and difficult. Would a Labour government pay reparations to developing countries for climate change?
I don't see it as about reparations. And actually, when you talk to lots of campaigners, they don't either. This is about the issue of so-called loss and damage. This is the fact that poorer countries are facing massive effects of climate change, you know, we see it all around the world. We see it.
And we can quibble about the terminology.
Well, no, the terminology matters because lots of people are allergic to the term reparations.
Our viewers will want to know also if a Labour government would transfer large amounts of cash to the developing world, including to China. Would Labour give money to China?
It's not about China. No, it's not about China.
So you
I don't think China isn't necessarily asking for money. Look, this is about poorer countries that are on the front line of the climate crisis. Pakistan had these disastrous floods recently, 30% of the country underwater. So this is about global solidarity. I mean, yes, we have some historical responsibility, but this is about global solidarity, and it's absolutely part of our aid commitment. You know, we don't think the government was right to cut the 0.7 aid commitment.
But so you would, just to be clear, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but to be clear, a Labour government would
it's about supporting poorer
money.
Countries, completely right. And let me just say, it's morally right, Laura, but it's also in our self-interest too. Because if we don't act and if we don't help countries around the world, we're going to end up with the problems that countries face in terms of refugees, for example, coming back onto us.
Except that China is part of the group of countries that is asking for loss and damage, to use the COP terminology.
We should recognise loss and damage, absolutely.
Including
but
for a country with as much money for China.
It's not about giving money to China. I promise you, Laura, it's not about giving money to China. That's not what this is about. This is about countries like the Maldives, like Pakistan and others. And we have aid commitments. Now, unfortunately, the government has resiled from many of our aid commitments, but it is absolutely about recognising our moral responsibility.
OK, Ed Miliband, thank you so much for coming in. We'll be watching carefully what happens at the COP in the next couple of weeks. Thank you for being here. Now, these are the latest pictures from COP, where world leaders are jetting in today to Sharm el-Sheikh, that resort. As we know, world leaders and their delegates are preparing to spend a whole 2 weeks wrangling about what happens next to protect the planet. But what happens in Sharm el-Sheikh is important, not just because of climate change, but also because the UK has been the president of COP for the last year. So Britain's reputation is also on the line, not least for the new Prime Minister. His right-hand man, Oliver Dowden, is here, otherwise known by your posh name, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, but essentially you have a cross-government role trying to make things happen. The UK's reputation is important in the context of this climate summit. We're way off course, as we've just been discussing. The British presidency has not been a success, has it?
I don't think that's a fair characterisation. I think actually if you look at what was achieved with the former Prime Minister at Glasgow, we made important steps forward, but it's clear that at Egypt we've got to make further progress. I think the United Kingdom government is delivering a lot, but clearly we need to have agreement across all nations, and this is an important milestone. I think you find with these COPs, as you go through each one, is critical because you need to keep that momentum going, and that's the challenge.
But the momentum from Glasgow has stalled, though, has it not? I mean, with the best will in the world, it's only 24 out of 193 countries have kept the promise that they were going to come back with tougher targets. And the UK itself has not yet paid all the money that it promised. So how can you say that actually it's been a success?
Well, we got some important commitments at
and they've
COP.
Not been
kept.
Of
course, we need to make more progress, and that's precisely what's happening at Egypt. And I hope we make that progress. In terms of what the United Kingdom government itself has done, if you look, for example, at renewables in the energy sector, there's been a 4- or 5-fold increase since the Conservatives came to power in 2010. So we are making big progress. And of course, we were the first country, pretty much major country in the world, to legislate for net zero by 2050.
And that was a Theresa May decision.
So there's very strong commitment.
But your own climate change committee, who are the sort of independent arbiters who check your homework, they've said that the UK is way off track.
Well, we're making good progress, but we still have more to do, as all countries have more to do. And I think that's one of the challenges of the Egypt conference, to make sure we continue to make that progress.
There is a sense, though, Oliver Dowden, that the urgency that was palpable, really, at Glasgow last year has faded. And if you look at what's happened in this country, you know, the climate chief, Alok Sharma, has been booted out of the cabinet. The government has granted 130 new gas and oil licences. And as I said, the UK hasn't even ponied up all the cash that it promised in Glasgow last year. It's slipped down the agenda, hasn't it?
I think that's totally not the case, and I know
those things are all true.
First of all, I know. Well, I'm happy to deal with each of those things, Laura. But I know that the Prime Minister is personally very, very strongly committed to this, and you just have to look at his record. Whether that was over £30 billion worth of climate-related support agreed in the last spending review, his commitment to the Environment 25-year plan, that was restated over the summer. I mean, in terms of Alok Sharma, who was an excellent president of COP, his time as president of COP was going to expire in a couple of weeks' time. I think most people are sick of having cabinet reshuffles, so the idea was just to bring this forward by a couple of weeks. But the Prime Minister's commitment remains absolute to this, and actually such was his desire to go that he was working over last weekend, made good progress with the autumn statement in the early part of last week. So he's now able to go to COP to show our commitment to this.
Such was his desire to go that he wasn't going to go.
Yes, well, the first priority coming in was to deal with this economic crisis that we've been facing. And of course, we had to make sure that we got the autumn statement in the right place. Now, thanks to the work that's happened over last weekend, at the early part of this week, he's now been able to make sure that he can go to that summit. And that's an indication of his commitment to it.
We spoke to Ed Miliband about Alaa Abdel Fattah, the British-Egyptian human rights activist who's in prison in Egypt. It's the government's role to try and get him out. Is there any chance of that happening?
Well, we continue to raise this case at all levels, and I know that the Foreign Secretary has raised it very recently with his opposite number. Of course, you wouldn't expect me to go into the contents of individual meetings that the Prime Minister will have when he's at Sharm el-Sheikh, but I know that this is top of his agenda as well.
And will he raise it
well,
with the Egyptians when he's there?
That will be up to the Prime Minister, but I know that he is very concerned about this case and it has already been raised by the Foreign Secretary, so I'm sure he will raise it at appropriate forums. I don't know exactly where he will raise it.
OK. Let's look at something else, a different topic that's been really worrying people, I think, this week. Let's take a look at this on the screen. I just want to show you a graph. Now, that is the increase in the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats. The green line for our viewers is what's happened this year. Look at it, growing year upon year upon year. You're not in control of our borders, are you?
Well, this is a totally deplorable situation. It is unacceptable that we now have the situation, as you can see from that graph, with almost 40,000 people crossing the channel.
Yeah, and you're responsible for managing it.
It's dangerous for the people concerned. It enriches gangs, and it's people going from one safe country, France, to another safe country, the United Kingdom.
The government you're part
of that is exactly why the Prime Minister is totally committed to gripping this. And I can tell you that he has been having meetings pretty much every day since he became Prime Minister to bring forward proposals to address this, whether that's in relation to preventing people coming across in the first place, deterring them and repatriating them and processing them across all those different areas.
But the Conservatives have been in charge for 12 years, and you keep telling us the Prime Minister is committed to this and committed to that, and he's going to do this and he's going to do that. You've had 12 years and this situation has got worse. In the last week, we've seen violence, we've seen overcrowding, we've heard of immigrants being dumped in the middle of cities around the UK, taxpayers concerned about their money being used to put people up in hotels around the country. This is chaotic, isn't it?
Well, if you're talking about the specific situation at Manston, it was the case that there were far too many people at that Manston site. It has a capacity of about 1,500. At one stage, there are up to 4,000 people there. We continue to make good progress removing people from that facility. The latest numbers I have is that there's about 1,800. So we're confident that by next week we'll be back within capacity. So that situation is being dealt with.
But how has the government allowed this situation to get so bad?
Well, there's a range of contributing factors that have driven this this surge of people across the Channel. For example, it was the case a few years ago that many people went across on the Channel Tunnel. They were able to get access to the site around there. As we've tightened up on that, this has created another problem with people crossing the Channel. And Laura, I do not dispute for a second that this situation has gone too far and why people are angry about it. Now, you've seen efforts from the last government to address this. Clearly, we need to do more on this, and I can tell you that the Prime Minister is totally seized of this to make sure that we work through each aspect of this to make sure that we start to control these numbers. And I'm not going to say this is going to be easy at all. It will be challenging for any government, and we're not going to get some sort of panacea to it overnight. But it is legitimate for people to expect us to grip this, and we will.
And can you give people this morning a commitment that the numbers will fall?
Well, of course, we need to make sure that we bear down on those numbers and seek to see a reduction in those numbers. And if you see the kind of exponential growth you saw on that chart, 2018, 2019, 2020, we can't continue with that kind of rate of growth.
Okay,
because actually the people that really pay the price for this are the legitimate refugees, whether that's from Ukraine or Afghanistan, where we're less able to accommodate them.
Okay, I'm sure we'll talk about this subject again in the next few weeks. I want to show you something else. For the audience, these are messages we can put up on the screen here that Gavin Williamson, who I think you're his boss in the Cabinet Office, a government minister, sent to the then Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. Now, I'm not going to read out everything they say because they're pretty vile. They contain some pretty unpleasant language. Is that an acceptable way to talk to a colleague?
No, it's not. And these were sent in the heat of the moment at a very difficult time. Gavin accepts that he shouldn't have said these things and that he regrets it, and we should all treat each other with respect and courtesy, and that was not the case there.
The problem with this is that Rishi Sunak, your boss, said on his first day moving into Downing Street that he was going to have a government with the highest integrity, the highest accountability and the highest levels of professionalism. He gave Gavin Williamson a job back in government, even though he'd been warned that there was a complaint of bullying.
Well, it was no secret that Gavin Williamson and others indeed didn't enjoy a good relationship with the Chief Whip at the time. It was not the case, though, that the Prime Minister saw the detail
no, but he
or
knew
actually
there was a
saw those
complaint
texts
against
themselves.
Gavin Williamson.
Well, the complaint itself is ongoing, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to prejudge that. And obviously, it has to be treated with confidentiality.
What's to prejudge? We've all seen the texts. There's no dispute. Gavin Williamson has said he did it and he knows he shouldn't have done it. I don't think viewers will think this morning there has to be some sort of big investigation. He did something he shouldn't have done that was obviously very unpleasant for the person who received those text messages. The Prime Minister knew there was a complaint about him bullying people and he gave him a job anyway. What is to investigate? Surely that's a complete contradiction of your boss's ambition to have a government of the highest integrity.
Well, on the facts of that exchange, as I said to you, that's not acceptable. He shouldn't have said it. He has said that he regrets doing so. He has given some context, which was that this was at the time of heightened frustration. It was, remember him as a backbencher to the Chief Whip.
What, so if you're in a bad mood, it's okay to talk like that to a colleague?
This is not acceptable. However, there is this complaints process ongoing, and it was not the case that the Prime Minister had seen this exchange of messages.
So there's no consequence for Gavin Williamson for doing this?
Well, as I said,
punishment,
Laura,
no consequence, he just says sorry and you move on?
The complaints process is ongoing, so I don't think, you can't say you're going to have a complaints process and then have a minister come on this show and start to prejudge that. What is right for me to say is that this is not acceptable. That is what Gavin himself has accepted. But I'm also saying to you is let that process complete.
I think what a lot of our viewers might also say is that the message that the government has sent by giving him a job in the knowledge that there was a complaint about him is that it's okay to do that and get a job back in government.
As I said, the Prime Minister had not seen the specifics.
He knew there was a complaint about
exchange.
him.
You've seen what the former chairman, Jake Berry, had said, and I have to say it was no great secret that there was not a good relationship between the two of them.
OK, Oliver Dowden, thank you so much for coming in. We'll see how that transpires in the next few days. Great to have you here. Now, I think our ears were pricked up by our panel during both of those interviews. Let's see what this morning's Brain Trust had to make of it all. A lot in there. So, first of all, to you, Miles Allen. You heard both of our politicians there talking about climate change, talking about the UK's approach. What's your reaction to their level of commitment?
Well, they're both trying to make the best of it, of the situation we're in. But, I mean, I think we also need to be real with people about where we are. I mean, when we discovered the need for net zero emissions 15 years ago, we just burned through each of these little, in case you're wondering, each of these little lumps of coal represents 500 billion tonnes of fossil carbon.
OK.
And if you burn it and dump all the CO2 in the atmosphere, that causes 1 degree of global warming. So when we first discovered the need for net zero 15 years ago, we just burned through the first 500 billion tonnes.
OK.
That took us 250 years.
OK.
15 years later, we're 1/3 of the way through the next 500 billion tonnes, burning it as fast as ever, and that one will take us to 2 degrees. And in the meantime, we've decided that actually we'd like to stop at 1.5. So the thing that I would love for all of these politicians to acknowledge is we have to stop fossil fuels from causing global warming before the world stops using fossil fuels.
But some climate activists would say that that is a controversial thing to say, that it should be, let's get rid of fossil fuels, let's get off the addiction to carbon. But you're saying there isn't time to do that.
It would be great if we could all just say no to fossil fuels. But fossil abstinence isn't working. We need to stop the problem at source, and it's perfectly possible to use fossil fuels without causing global warming. You just have to stop putting the carbon dioxide they generate into the atmosphere. The cost of capturing every single molecule of carbon dioxide generated by the natural gas we use in the UK would be 4 pence per kilowatt hour. We currently pay on average, the energy price cap is 34 pence. And yet nobody's asking the fossil fuel companies that supply us with that gas to deal with the carbon dioxide they generate in that way.
Well, I think you've just set down a big challenge for the politicians, and it's very, very interesting to hear that and understand things better with the use of your props there. Diana, what did you make of Oliver Dowden's answers on immigration? I mean, the government is in a bad position politically on this. The Home Secretary, we can see today, wrote an opinion piece in the Mail on Sunday saying that people who come illegally are not welcome, even though Britain is generous. But we've also seen, you know, reports of violence, the overcrowding at Manston, problems at a migration centre in London yesterday. So what did you make of his account of himself?
Well, I think he's failing to recognise that this has been building for some time. This is not just something that's happened in the last few weeks with the increasing number, as we all know, of people coming across in small boats. You know, there's a huge backlog in the asylum system, 117,000 people waiting for an initial decision. We know that 96% of the people who came across in small boats last year are still waiting for a decision. So this has been building. It seems to me the Home Office were already planning for increasing numbers this year. And that's why I'm so surprised. They've got themselves into such a mess at Manston. So you know, this is successive governments. They've been watching these figures grow. And there was quite a lot of talk, actually, with Ed Miliband and with Oliver Dowden about leadership. And one of the things that the government need to do is provide some leadership in terms of dealing with European countries, because we don't have deals about returning people. We haven't really got the excuse me, the correct arrangements with France in order protecting the border and making sure people don't travel.
But while we know that we think that the Prime Minister is going to meet Emmanuel Macron actually at the COP summit, of course, these whatever the subject, there's always opportunities for diplomatic moments to occur. I know you are a Labour politician, but you also study this stuff carefully. What do you think has actually gone wrong?
I think, to be honest, we produced a report from the Home Affairs Select Committee in the summer. We were very clear in that the government had taken its eye off the nitty-gritty, the day-to-day dealings with immigration, having the right number of people dealing with asylum claims. The government said they were going to have 1,000 decision makers by the end of last year. They missed that target. They've taken more people on. There's some stories in the press today about they've taken people on, but are they getting the right training and the right support to make good decisions? Because if you don't make good decisions, then you end up with appeals. The whole thing goes on and on. But the key thing about Manston is that the fact is you've got so many people waiting for decisions in hotels. That's the blockage, and that's why the Home Affairs Select Committee says the first thing they should do is clear that backlog. That would open up the system.
OK, so problems along the chain. Justine, with the autumn statement coming, of course, there's a lot in the papers this morning about the possible different options for the economy. Now, you were, and we can see the pictures here, part of George Osborne's team in 2010.
Yeah, looking a lot younger.
I think we all looked a lot younger then. Now, that was a huge political and a huge economic moment. New coalition government came in, made some very tough decisions on spending, cut a lot of budgets. How would you compare this moment? And what do you think the scale of the challenge is?
I think it is another moment. I think we're in a moment. We're a country that's left the European Union, we've had COVID, and we're now coming into a very difficult economic time, but actually it's about building for the future. And so you're right, we did do the emergency budget, but the backdrop was actually very different. It was a credit crunch. We'd fought an election on being a government that needed to get Britain's finances into shape and live within its means, and we then got on and delivered that.
So you had a mandate to do it?
We had a mandate to do it, and it's also fair to say interest rates were low, and so people had they had mortgaged more money in their pockets. I think the challenge now is it's a very different world. What the markets want to see is a long-term plan for Britain getting its public finances in order, but that also ties to this mandate that Boris Johnson won on levelling up. It's this issue of too many lives off track in Britain that cost money and needing to get them on track. This issue of people being disconnected from opportunity, and this being a country where people can't afford to heat their homes, they can't afford to put food on the table, but at the same time, companies I work with on social mobility are saying they can't find the skills to fill great jobs and careers that they've already got. So this is a time, I think, on the 17th of November and beyond, where we take a decision, just as governments took a decision after World War II. Is it too hard to create the NHS or welfare state? We could have thought it was, but actually we need to do that as an opportunity. We need to make sure that Britain is now connecting people up to opportunities and clearing the way for talent to succeed.
OK, all three of you, thank you very much for now. It's fascinating to hear you say that this is like a sort of post-World War II moment. We'll see, of course, what the government comes up with next week. And in a moment, we'll hear from Sir Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. But as we've just been discussing, the government is about to unveil huge decisions over how they spend our money and make ends meet. On next week's programme, just before that autumn statement, we're hoping the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will both be here. And we'd love to know the questions that you would want to put with them. What is going on with your family budget? What's going on maybe in your own business or your job in public services? The best way to get in touch with us, put my teeth back in, is to email kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. If you're social media inclined, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura K. And you can follow this morning's conversation on the BBC Live page, and the address is there for you now. As promised, Sir Ed Davey is here, waiting patiently. Thank you so much for coming in. Now, one of the jobs you've done before your current one is you were the Energy Secretary in the coalition. Do you think there's any chance of COP this week being a success?
I don't think so, unfortunately. I don't think there's been the leadership either from our country or frankly from other countries. I think the backdrop is of international disruption, and people haven't seen the opportunity that if you invest in renewables, you invest in insulating people's homes, you lower people's bills, really important at the moment, and you protect the environment, and you annoy President Putin, because you get great energy security for our country and for the Western world. So there should have been, in the run-up to COP, a taking of the opportunity by people across the world, and I'm afraid that's not happened.
And it doesn't seem to have kind of occupied the political space, but in part that's because there's so much going on at home, and I think many of our viewers will be much more focused on the things that are affecting them. Now, you've announced a plan to help homeowners pay their mortgages today. You'll give anyone facing a rise in mortgage payments equivalent to 10% of their income a grant of up to £300 a month. Why?
Well, the Conservatives trashed the economy, and the impact of the Conservatives' chaotic handling of the economy has meant mortgage rates going up, and many families, struggling families, already struggling with food bills and energy bills, are seeing their mortgage payments go up by hundreds of pounds a month. And previously, there were schemes to help families who were really struggling. Back during the financial crisis, there was a similar scheme to the one we're proposing, which was helping hundreds of thousands of people. And what Liberal Democrats are saying today, there needs to be that help again. And I'm quite alarmed, frankly, Laura, that the Conservatives who caused this mess, who are causing the pain for hundreds of thousands of families, are not actually trying to help them.
But would people who own their own homes, and they may have a mortgage, but people who have, therefore, assets, some of them might be on very high salaries, are they really the people who need the most help right now?
They won't get help in this scheme. They didn't in the past. We're learning...
So would it be means-tested, this scheme?
Well, it's only going to go to those who are really struggling. I mean,
how then? What does that mean? Would it be means-tested?
Let me just take you through. Essentially, we think that the banks and building societies, the people who are lending the money, have got to really reach out and help their customers. If people are struggling, the banks and building societies need to work through with people who've got arrears and people who are facing repossessions. So there is a real onus on the banks and building societies to step up. But if they fail, and if it's still a problem, and so we're talking about people who are really struggling, then there needs to be some help from the government, as there used to be. And what I find astonishing is the Conservatives have caused this mess. Now, even the Governor of the Bank of England was saying that.
Forgive me,
Yeah.
I'm still not clear about how this scheme would actually work. So how would people be eligible? Who would be eligible for this extra cash?
Well, those people who are seeing their mortgage payments go up the most and who are struggling the most. I mean, we've got the lessons from the past. I mean, we're not creating something completely new, Laura. This is something that used to be there to help people who were facing repossession, facing homelessness, people who are really struggling.
But I'm still struggling to understand actually how it would work. So I hear the sentiment, you want to help the people who are having a really hard time keep up with their mortgage payments, and there will be many people in that situation. But who would actually get the help?
Well, first of all, they've got to be struggling.
How do you define that?
Well, both in terms of what's happening with their ability to repay their mortgages. If they're having a real problem, they're facing months of arrears, facing the potential of repossession, by definition, they are struggling. So they're almost self-defining. And then we would look at how much their mortgage payments have gone up. And I come back to this, Laura. There used to be this scheme. There used to be schemes like this that used to help people, used to help hundreds of thousands of people.
But would there be any limit on if somebody watching this morning might actually be quite well paid? They might be a senior teacher, for example, or somebody might be earning, say, £60,000-70,000, which is a very generous salary. But they might have seen a huge increase in their mortgage payments, maybe of £5,000, £6,000, £7,000 a year. Would they be eligible for help, somebody on that kind of salary? Because they might feel that they're absolutely struggling, and yet they're on 3 times the median salary.
Well, I agree with you. There are loads of people who are struggling all across the income scale, and the government needs to find different ways of helping them. Most of all, not making the mess in the first place. But let's be clear, people who are struggling the most, who could face repossession, we're targeting our help at those, as used to happen. That seems to be reasonable.
Okay, but although I don't think our viewers need it to point us out, but you were not giving us details of exactly who and exactly how the decisions will be made. But many of the people who are struggling are people who rent. Now, why are you giving help, offering very generous help potentially to people who own their own homes, and nothing extra for renters?
Oh, well, we have a package to help renters too, and we're particularly calling on the government to implement their long-promised plan, when they just keep delaying it, that there should be a ban on no-fault evictions.
But that's got nothing to do with people not being able to pay their bills.
Well, it has absolutely no. I'm sorry.
But in terms of cash help, I know the wider implication, but in terms of cash help, you've got a big offer to people with mortgages. Is there a similar cash offer for people who are struggling to pay their rent?
Well, in the past, there used to be a similar scheme, which is what we're modelling on, for people on mortgages, and the Conservatives got rid of that. There is a help for people who are renting. It's called housing benefit. And so what we're doing in bringing back this mortgage protection fund is bringing back something that the Conservatives got rid of, so we can balance up between people who are struggling with their mortgage arrears and people who are renting. Actually, they're quite parallel. I think they're quite similar in the sense that trying to get the government to get rid of their ban on no-fault evictions is in many ways similar and analogous to trying to give help so people aren't repossessed.
OK, and we talked to Michael Gove about that in the studio last week. Just finally, and we're almost out of time, I know you want to build the Liberal Democrats from your success in big by-elections. I know you want to build that up in the by-election and get your numbers up to something much healthier in the House of Commons. But after the next election, if there isn't an overall majority, would you go into coalition again?
Well, my focus at the moment and my mandate when I became leader of the Liberal Democrats was to beat Conservative MPs, and I make no apology for that.
So you'd prop up Labour, but not the Tories?
Don't put words into my mouth there, Laura.
I'm asking you a question. I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm asking you a question.
Well, I'm focusing on my job and my mandate, and I've been fighting Conservatives all my life, and what I want to do is to make sure we get rid of as many Conservative MPs as possible. In fact, the only way, I think, of getting rid of this Conservative government is across the blue wall and seats like it. People vote Liberal Democrat, get rid of the Conservative MP.
It's definitely going to be one of the big battles in the next couple of years. Ed Davey, it's great to have you in the studio. Thanks so much for coming in. Now, let's talk about something cheerful. Remember this? That magic moment when England's women, the Lionesses, lifted the Euros trophy.
It's coming on! It's coming! Football's coming!
The achievement was huge and the excitement massive, but it was a long journey to get there. Baroness Sue Campbell has just taken her seat as the Director of Women's Football, and to many, the power behind the goals. We've so been looking forward to you coming in this morning, so welcome to the programme. One of the aims after that stunning success was to get more girls to play football and to make it possible for all girls in school to play football if they wanted to. Has that happened?
No, but Lottie and Leah on the bus actually after the win on the evening, we had rather a good party, and then on the bus on the way into Trafalgar Square they approached me to say, we don't want the legacy to just be this moment, we want the legacy to be that no girl in the future has to struggle like we've struggled to play football, whether it's in a school or in a club. Many of them had to battle prejudice and difficulties to get through to where they are, and I said that's terrific, and they wrote to both potential Prime Ministers at the time, and we're absolutely determined that we want to work together to make that happen.
And have you heard anything back? I mean, there's been a bit going on in Downing Street, one in, one out, and then another one in, but have you heard anything back, or perhaps from the Culture Secretary, Michelle Donnellan?
We did. We met with Michelle and Liz Truss, actually. They came to visit the players before Liz Truss left us, and they did listen, and Michelle Donnellan was very clear that she wants to make something happen. But the big issue is the Department for Education. We really do need their support, and the Department of Health, because physical education and sport is not just about sport. It's about educational attainment, it's about health, it's about social interaction. We believe it's one of the most powerful tools you can to change young people's lives. So the players are very committed to follow this through. They won't be shaken off, I can assure you. They're determined, just as they were to win the Euros, they're determined that this goal will be achieved.
OK, well, it'll be really interesting to hear how you get on, and maybe we'll keep an eye on that on this programme too. We've been told, Baroness Campbell, that you're quite modest and you don't like to take personal credit for the win and the victory and everything that the Lionesses have achieved. So we did something that you don't actually know about. We've asked some of them to describe how important you are.
Embarrassing.
So I'm going to show this to you, and if you just want to look into the camera over there.
I think it's hard to put into words what Sue Campbell has done for our team in terms of all her hard work behind the scenes, the way that she fights for us, and she's done that for so many years, behind closed doors with no thanks. But I think you see now kind of the fruits of her labour, and hopefully that continues.
Baroness Sue Campbell, where do I begin? Your impact on the women's game has been tremendous. The work that you've put in, the hours on and off the field, in boardrooms fighting for us, we are so thankful, and what we produced this summer was all through your hard work off the pitch. We produced it on the pitch. You always believed in us. You came to every camp, you brought enthusiasm, you brought hunger, you brought desire, and through you we showed what we could do on the pitch, and we are so thankful for you, and keep fighting.
The team that she's put together in terms of the staff has been absolutely phenomenal, and we wouldn't have had any of the success if it wasn't for her putting that team in place, so we're forever thankful for her for that.
We're hoping for much more for women's football, and to share that summer with her was really special, and she's our biggest fan.
I think they're your biggest fans. That was Nikita, Mary, Rachel and Alessia talking about your contribution to the game. How did you feel watching that? I know when my team watched it wasn't a dry eye.
Quite emotional. They're very special. This is a very special group of women, and you know, none of these things happen. Leadership is about galvanising people around you, creating a sense of mission and helping to support people to get to that mission. And the success this summer is taking years to put together with a great team at the Football Association. But, you know, we've added that magic piece to the jigsaw, which is a world-class coach. Serena's arrived. She's a wonderful leader, a great people manager, brilliant, open, honest, direct communication. And it's just added that extra piece to the jigsaw puzzle.
And talking about leadership, and it's clear the impact that you've had, even though it's behind the scenes. I'm delighted to be able to show some of it to the audience this morning. Talking of leadership, the Women's World Cup next year is in Australia and New Zealand, but the Men's World Cup is going to be in Qatar. Now, one of the Lionesses, Beth Mead, has made it clear, as many people have made it clear, that because of the attitude in Qatar towards LGBT rights, that it shouldn't happen there, that it's not appropriate. What's your view?
Well, first of all, we don't decide where these World Cups are held. And what I think our players have made very clear, our male players, is that they have their own values and they will show those, and they'll wear Harry will wear the One Love band, as we will continue to show that we have very different values and we live by those values. But the games are in Qatar, and we are going to do our best, and we wish Gareth and the team the very best of luck. You know, we accept there's some progress been made, but an awful lot more to be made in the future.
Okay, Baroness Campbell, thank you so much for coming in. We've been looking forward to having you in for a long time, so it's great to have you here. Thank you
very much.
Now, we are nearly at 10 o'clock. It's been a busy hour. Remember, we started the programme talking about the COP Climate Summit and asking if we could afford to solve the climate crisis right now, or if we can afford not to act. Let's hear again from Ed Miliband for Labour.
I've been at these summits, Laura, and if you go, as Britain is going to be doing, and saying, Rishi Sunak, we want to lead, and then people say, but you've got an onshore wind ban, that's against clean power. You're going hell for leather for new fossil fuel licences. Well, that's inconsistent. You're reneging on your commitments that you made in Glasgow in terms of helping poorer countries. That's not leadership. And you weren't even thinking you were going to go.
Now, we're going to come to that in just a second, but Justine Greening, I've just remembered you were Education Secretary as well as all the other things you did in government. Listening to Sue Campbell say the government's got to do better for sport for girls in school. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I did swimming when I was younger, and I learnt so much from that. Persistence, resilience, that has been how I've been able to have some success in my own life. So I think it's crucial. I think the other thing she actually said that was really important was leadership is about giving people a sense of mission. And I think whatever happens on the 17th of November, what the government and Rishi Sunak needs to do is give the British people a sense of mission. Where are we going? What's the point of any sacrifices in the short term? If it can lead to a better version of Britain that has equality of opportunity long term, then I think people will buy into that.
And it sounds like you think that's missing right now.
I think he needs to, he came into office when he wasn't expecting to, but he does need to set out where he wants to take Britain and why. What is a good version of this country he's trying to create?
Okay, we're very short on time. Diana, when it comes back to climate change, do you feel, as someone who's been in politics for a while, do you feel that politicians have actually gripped it?
No, but I think we're starting to, and I think there's a real impetus now to do much more. Can I just go back to what Justine was saying? Levelling up was what this government, back in 2019 when they were elected, that was their mission statement, levelling up. And as a Northern MP, I'm really looking for the 17th of November. What are they going to deliver for my area and Yorkshire and the North? Because at the moment we're hearing they're going to cut. They're not investing, they're cutting.
And that's one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about next week on the programme. Final brief word to you, Miles Allen, from listening to everything this morning. How do you think the sense of urgency is there to deal with climate change?
Well, I think people have to realise this is a fixable problem. For less than the combined taxes, profits and royalties that are paid in what we pay for gas will be enough to capture every single molecule that gas generates back out of the atmosphere, stick it back under the North Sea twice over. We've got to get the fossil fuel industry acting responsibly and not just fly-tipping their waste product into the atmosphere.
OK, we've heard your message loud and clear, as have your two. Thank you so much, all three of you, for being here this morning. Really interesting conversations. Now, time for something slightly different. We have been talking about prosperity and the prospects for the planet this morning, which might make you think of live long and prosper, which was Spock's famous blessing in the Star Trek series. And last year, science fiction became real when William Shatner, Captain Kirk, reached the final frontier at the age of 90, travelling into space on Jeff Bezos' spaceship. I've been talking to the actor, who's also a keen environmentalist, who's just written a book, Boldly Go, where he revealed how his trip to space made him feel about planet Earth.
So finally we got up and everybody played around in weightlessness. I made my way to the window. And for some reason, I looked behind me.
Oh, wow.
And I saw the wake of the spaceship through the air, like a submarine going through the water.
I can't believe this.
I thought, wow, I've never heard anybody talk about that. And then I looked ahead of me and I saw the blackness of space. And I've had a great deal to do with space, and I've talked to scientists and I've looked through telescopes and I've loved the mystery of space. But that blackness had nothing to it. There was no alleviating mystery there. The only mystery was how palpably black it was. And in that moment, I thought I saw death. When I looked back there and I saw the beige of the desert that we had just left and the white clouds and the blue sky, I saw life. So death, life. And then that was my overwhelming feeling until we got back. And when I stepped off of the spaceship, I started to cry.
What you have given me is the most profound experience I can imagine. I'm so filled with emotion about what just happened. It's extraordinary, extraordinary.
I was weeping and I had no idea why. And I was just so confused that I had to sit down for several minutes when I realized I was in grief. And what was I in grief about? I've been an ecologist for a long time, and I realized I was in grief for the world.
You write in your book about the fragility of Earth and how everything in nature is connected, and how if we remove any of those links, everything ends up endangered.
That's what I think the point of my book is, the interconnection of people to nature, of nature to the universe. And I tried to give that sense of vibration, being aware of how connected we all are and how to tune in to that vibrating universe. That's what I think the book is about.
It is about that, but it's also about the impact you fear the human race is having on the planet and how you see that accelerating.
We don't realize how close we are to total destruction. We are on the edge of a precipice. It isn't like, oh, we're wandering along a path, maybe we should turn off the path. We're about to go over the edge. We're killing ourselves. That's the imperative of what it is, are you worried about? No, I'm not worried about it. I'm in the agony of my kids, my grandkids. It's just terrible. And everybody's saying, well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't, and we'll get to do something soon. And we're at war. The war is using up all our energies that should be going to taking care of the earth. We're destroying. It's just the madness, the insanity of it is just plagues me to the degree of anger and sorrow.
Why, though, is it the right thing for there to be a sort of billionaire space race? Should people be engaging in space travel for fun, as you did, given the amount of resources and carbon that uses?
One element of getting into space, though, which is Jeff Bezos' idea, which is to get all the polluting industries up into, 200-300 miles into orbit and have our industry up there, polluting up there where it doesn't matter, and get the people and have the people live up there and have the people come down onto Earth, which is now green and non-polluting and like it was before the Industrial Revolution or something like that. So I said, well, that's 100 years from now. He said, well, you got to have hope. Without hope, what do you got?
And tell me more about how the journey into space in real life changed how you think of your own sense of mortality.
It made me this emotional thing you're looking at right now. So I saw the curvature of the earth, and everybody talks about it, but if I continue the circle it with my finger, I could circle this little rock that we're all living on. We're on this little insignificant rock, going around an insignificant star in a somewhat insignificant Milky Way, and we're billions upon billions of what we can see, which only means what we can see, because it doesn't make sense to me that what we can see is all there is.
And finally, live long and prosper is that phrase you'll be very familiar with. You've certainly lived long and well and prospered in all sorts of ways. What's been your secret?
That's no secret. I mean, I think that as I get closer and closer to dying, I think I see how precious life is. And if only we could inculcate that we do, in our children. If only we keep that curiosity of children alive. I mean, just acquiring knowledge is in itself an adventure.
The amazing adventures of William Shatner and what he fears is at stake with the climate. That is it for us this morning. But it seemed that although politicians of all stripes say they want to ease the climate crisis, when it comes to action, that's not so straightforward. And the atmosphere is certainly very different to this time last year, when that huge climate get-together, COP in Glasgow, did have a real sense of urgency. We will be watching carefully to see what happens in Egypt and what is or is not agreed. And I can't help thinking we haven't heard the last of that embarrassment for the Conservative Minister, Gavin Williamson. It's early in his time in office for Rishi Sunak to be dealing with that kind of mess. You can, as ever, catch up on anything that you missed today on the iPlayer. And don't forget to email us with what you'd like to ask the Chancellor or Shadow Chancellor this time next week. Till then, thank you for watching and goodbye.